Planyavsky approaches this subject from the point of view of the double bass player. Now think about this. We play bass now, for a long time, both of us. Have you not ever been in a situation where someone says, listen, we don't want the bass there. The bass doesn't play that.
I had a blast connecting with today's guest. We have so much in common and dig into two different but equally interesting topics, in my opinion. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations. We're talking today with James Barket, who is the orchestra director at Webb Bridge Middle School in suburban Atlanta. He also teaches bass at Kennesaw State University, and he did the English translation for Alfred Planyavsky's book, The Baroque Double Bass Violone, which is a fantastic read. I discovered this book. I'd known of this book, but I discovered it doing some research for some bass history videos, looked up James, and then it turns out he's a teacher with a thriving career in the Atlanta area. So we go deep on teaching a topic that I'm passionate about. I used to teach public school orchestra myself. So we talk about that. We talk about all sorts of things, James' path through the music world, and of course, this wonderful resource, the Baroque Double Bass Violone by Alfred Planyavsky, a bit about what he was like as a person and doing this translation. Quick shout out to our sponsors, Dorico, Ear Trumpet Labs, and Modasi. More on them later, but let's dive into this conversation with James Barket. I did a chamber music festival in Door County, Wisconsin for about 15 years. And Allyson is now executive director of the festival or something. She's still playing there. And so I'd heard about the school in other places, but I remember it sounds like a great place. So it sounds like they've really built something cool.
For the long time, I don't know how well you know Atlanta. And I'll tell you what, I know you like to go places when this pandemic ends, or you like to go places and spend some time in your interview. By the way, I heard your interview today with Michael Kurth. It was outstanding, and he's just really terrific.
Isn't he great?
He is really. We did actually. There's a high school here that used to have a summer program, and he used to do the basses, but he wasn't available every single. He needed to be 5 days in a row, so I came and helped and worked with him a couple of years in a row, and just. It was such a pleasure to work with him. He's really a brilliant guy. I mean, he knows something about almost every aspect of music, every kind of music, you name it. He's great with the kids. He was even right. This is probably 20 years ago, and he was dabbling in composition at that time. And he actually wrote a couple things that he gave me, and I've used them over the years, and they all have been great. So but anyway, Atlanta is full of things like this. It's full of great high school programs. And the kids, right now, for example, the nice thing about the pandemic is I've been doing things online that ordinarily I would not have a chance to do. Like, for example, I did the ISB workshop this summer. It was great. Thank you for organizing that. And I love the ISB. I've gone a couple of times, but I do these other summer camps that are like sometimes 3 and 4 weeks. So I need to have at least some time with my family. So June, I kind of, first 3 weeks of June, I usually just stay here and do stuff around the house because then I'm gone for like 5 weeks in a row, after that. But this year I could do it because I was, I could do it. It was nice about too. I could be fixing my bike and I was listening to things. So I didn't have to be in one spot. It was really great. And every part of it was great. But that final concert with John Clayton and Christian McBride and Gary Carr was just out of this world.
Well, that was one of the most nerve-wracking moments of my recent life because, we were, it was all scissors and tape trying to hold these things together. And and I had this hilarious moment where I'm looking at Gary Carr, John Clayton, and Christian McBride and me on Zoom, my ugly mug. I thought in what world am I? Well, I'll take it. But yeah, it was fun. That event, I was wondering if that was going to feel like a bass convention. And it really did much more than I was expecting. Because I thought it was going to be good. Or I hope it was going to be good, but I definitely kind of got that session vibe, and it's kind of nice to be able to putter. I was like baking bread and watching master classes, and it was kind of a nice way to spend the time. I know that early June is such a bummer for especially people in education, right? Like the ISB time, because I couldn't go for a decade because I was teaching high school orchestra, and that was like smack dab in the middle of finals. There was just no option.
Yeah, it's tricky, but I go when I can. But nevertheless, that was nice to be able to do that. And so getting back to Atlanta, same thing like Midwest. I love to go to Midwest, but again, it's at the end of December. Like high school teachers, they're finished at that time. The kids are taking finals. I have kids in the room and we're just doing stuff. It's almost impossible to get a sub at that time. So I go once in a while. I go now our high school has played a couple times, so I've gone up when they play. I take a day off and I'll go and watch them. but it's really hard to get there. But this year, because it was online, what I did is I joined, and I've been watching it. I had no time in the last 3 weeks, but I've been watching it a little bit of the time these last couple of days. And I'll tell you what, 4 or 5 groups playing are from Atlanta. What they did is they did like archives. They brought kids, So Atlanta has been like this, and going back to the 90s. We've had groups playing in the Midwest, bands and orchestras. So there's this great hub of musicians here. So if you ever wanted to come down here and spend some time, you'd love it. Atlanta's a great place, first of all, and second of all, just there's so many people here that would be great on the podcast. So if you can just talk to me, I set you up with a whole bunch.
I will 100% take you up on that offer. That's sort of what I was getting into more before the pandemic hit, was like actually going for a week or two to a place and just like soaking it in. And so I will make it to Atlanta soon. I'm ashamed to say I don't think I've ever been anywhere outside of the Atlanta airport. I don't know how I've lived my life, and I've been around the South too. I have family in Tennessee. I played Spoleto in South Carolina a couple summers. I've been to Savannah, but I don't know. So I will take you up on that offer. It's one of those places that, it seems like, especially if you're thinking about school groups and music education, oh my goodness, it's one of the epicenters of that in the country, really. It must be so cool to be a teacher there.
Oh, it's really great. And, just getting back to Kennesaw, we've had these programs here for so long. But we were to have a university right in the area where kids could stay in Atlanta and go. And Kennesaw was there, but it was kind of small. When I first came to Georgia in '94, it was one of the smaller state universities. But then gradually grew, this is just makes me crazy that I can't remember his name now. It was Alex. It would come back to me, but when he came in on 2000, Doug Sommer, I don't know if you remember Doug, if you had met him, he was on the faculty there for a long time and brought people in. It's a tragedy what happened with Doug, but anyways, and the thing about Doug too, he was friendly and knew everybody. He knew every bass player in the state or anywhere around. They all knew him, so he brought people. He came down. I was in Valdosta at that time. He came down to the concert with me in Valdosta. He brought all kinds of people up to Kennesaw. So he was doing things like that. People were doing things and bringing people there. And before you know it, they started bringing on a bunch of ASO faculty. Now most of the string faculty is ASO players. Joe McFadden is the main bass teacher there. Principal. You've had him on the podcast, and just great player, great teacher. My son actually goes to Kennesaw and studies with Joe. And I teach basically either the education majors who definitely want to study with an educator teacher, or just the students he doesn't have time to teach.
Yep. I had that exact job at DePaul University. I know your position quite well. I was the Chicago Symphony bassists were the people you study with if you're a performer, but I taught the jazz majors classical lessons. They had that model, and then the music ed students, and then there would always be 1 or 2 people that weirdly couldn't fit into Rob Cassinger's schedule or Alex's, but it was so that is such. I'm sure you can relate because of your teaching background. It's so cool to have your hand in that college teaching world too, when you spend so much of your time with middle schoolers, high schoolers. That's great. I love that age. It's a wonderful age to teach, but it's kind of cool to be able to work with people on some rep.
Yeah. Well, what I like about it too is I like to explain to them just how to apply what we're doing to what you're going to be teaching. That it is very similar. I'm teaching on a higher level and kids are more focused, but the thing is, the skill, you're still teaching musical skills, and you got to figure out a way to teach it to these kids who coming in, who knows what they're thinking about when they come in that door, in a sense, but they love music, but again, when they're in there, they're middle school kids. They're going to be middle school kids, but it's worked out really nice for me. I'll just put it that way, the whole situation. And Atlanta's been great. I came up to Atlanta. We came up in 2000, just because I came here. I had no intention actually of being a string teacher when I started my career. And, I didn't really know why. I just knew I wanted to play the bass and do something in music, playing the bass. And I was a late starter, but I was really fortunate. I happened to live in Connecticut, in the 80s. And Gary Carr just happened to teach hard school music. I probably would end up going to hard school music no matter what. And I didn't really even know who he was at the time because I started playing bass so late, But I studied with this guy from the Hartford Symphony. His name was Jim Carroll. And he said, if you could go to hard school music, you'd like it because it's a great bass teacher here. And so he told me who he was, and of course, back then, now, if, somebody said his name, I could go on YouTube, I could figure out exactly, what he's doing. Back then, like I've heard you say many times in the podcast, you had to go to the library and get records and things. So I was just sort of trying to investigate who he was. And the teacher I had at the time, I think he either liked or wanted to date one of the bass players in the studio at Hart, because he used to have me wait right outside the bass studio for my lessons. I didn't know it was where I was. It's just outside 141. So I'd be waiting out there. So one day I'm waiting out there, and this guy comes out at 141, and he comes over and starts talking to me, starts asking me these questions about the bass. I said, yeah, I just started playing. I'm starting with Jim Carroll. Yes, yeah. He says, well, you like the bass? I said, yeah, I really like it. And he says, well, great. He says, he's talking to me. I'm just talking to me. And he was clear at that point. I didn't recognize him. So he says, by the way, I'm Gary Carr. He puts his hand up. And I'm like, oh, all right, well, there we are. So what was great about Gary, many, many great things about Gary, but he will take any student. Like, first of all, some people told me, listen, don't apply to Harvard. This really famous bass teachers there. You're not going to get in unless you play for many, many years. And I said, well, I'm going to try it. But Gary, if you're a serious player, doesn't matter what your level is. It doesn't matter, you can from 8 to 80. He will take you and he'll work with you. So when I first came, actually, because I didn't know much about classical, I actually started as a jazz major. And I didn't know if I would stay, but I wanted to take classical lessons. So I ended up taking with David Murray, who was his assistant at that time. And then we did math classes with Gary. Then after a year, it was clear I wanted to be a classical major. So then I switched over. And then the rest is history, basically. I've been, and I still do play some jazz, and I love jazz, but I'm really more aesthetically, a classical musician. It's just, where I come from. But so that was but I was dead set to play the bass, in music. And ended up, following Gary. He went to Yale, went there for my master's, and then graduated a master's degree. And not a lot of job prospects at that point. I still was a pretty young player at that time, even though I had a master's degree. I'd only been playing about 6 or 7 years. So I'm still trying to work on things. And I had a friend who was a cellist, at that time. And he said, listen, you got to understand that no matter what you want to do, let's say you want to get on the college faculty or something like that. Right now, you have a master's degree, but that doesn't mean anything to them. You have to go and get a doctorate somewhere if you want to be a college teacher. So I said, yeah, I guess I could do that, but I was in Connecticut. I love Connecticut. I grew up there, and it's like there's so many things going on now. I was hooked in. I was playing games. I was doing stuff. I never thought I would leave. And, also, I'm a big pizza person. I lived in New Haven. Like, New Haven's like the perfect.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Oh, that's some of my favorite pizza all time.
Yeah. So I was like thinking, gosh, I really want to leave Connecticut. But I had a friend who was a guitar player and a really good one. And he went down to Tallahassee to do his doctorate down there. So I'm down to visit him, and of course I had been outside Connecticut, never seriously. So I spent a couple of days with him hanging out. And I said, I guess, there's you go up Northeast, you get this kind of mentality because you're right near New York that, you don't want to ever get too far away. And it's true in many ways, but there's a whole world out there, as I've learned, out beyond the Northeast. So I started looking around for places to go and ended up discovering Jack Budwell when he was in North Carolina. He was at UNCG. And I needed to find somebody, who could teach me, and kind of take me further, especially in the orchestral realm where I hadn't really done a lot of work, but would be accepting to what I had done with Gary. It was not somebody who wanted to completely change everything that I wanted to do. And I just spent a night on the phone talking to Jack, and he said, I was clear he was the person I should go to. So I ended up doing that, finished my doctorate, and then that's how we ended up going to Austria. I did a Fulbright, and then came back, and I ended up getting that job in Valdosta. So I thought I was right on the college teaching track. I was going to stay there. And then part of the job in Valdosta was teaching strings because they were trying to grow the string program down there. That was when the string projects were all restarting. So we did this thing, it was called South Georgia String Project. And, I taught at this elementary school called Parker Methodist Elementary School. It was this it was a neat school, but it's like in South Georgia, it's old school, old building. It's like, if you think of like your typical 1960s, 1970s building, it was it. And it's like kids we would teach on this. I take them in these little rooms somewhere, to 7, 8 kids at a time, trying to teach them how to play strings. And then I taught sometimes in middle school. We had this little youth orchestra, which my wife and I ended up doing. I was sort of the manager, and she was the conductor. And then my son was born in 1999, actually, in June of 99. So that summer, we did the summer program. My wife couldn't conduct. She wanted to stay home with Daniel. So I did the managing and the conducting. And I really liked it. It's like, wow, this is really kind of cool. And then, I'd always kind of been looking, because the job at Valdosta was a good job. It was part-time, full-time, but non-tenure track. So it wasn't a job that was going to last me forever. So I auditioned for a few other jobs, but nothing had really come through. And I was thinking, you don't want to, be a full-time non-tenure track for the rest of my life. And I just got to decide, what the next step is. And we would take trips up to Atlanta too, recruiting for students. And I just was so impressed with the string programs and with the teachers and how dedicated they were and how knowledgeable they were. And I joined the ASTA board like in the mid-90s, and I got to know, I would be at these meetings. I was, and when I was on the board, Kirk Moss was on that board. Sharon Anderson, she's a big teacher here in Georgia. But Kirk Moss now has been president of ASTA. Ann Sheldon is this great teacher from Atlanta. Kathy Huddles is also a great teacher from Atlanta. They were all on the board. These are some of the best teachers, all of whom are taking kids to the Midwest. So and I'm hearing what they're doing. I'm saying, wow, this is just incredible. So, I was in Valdosta. We have a son. We were playing. When you live in a small town like that, if there's anything going on musically, you're involved in it, which is great. Like, you're busy, but you're busy. I can understand. So I'm working every day, week. And so finally, we just looked around. It's like, July, maybe not July, but January, February of 2000, and Daniel's like 6 months old. And my wife just said to me, listen, we can't raise a kid like this. We've got to do something else. I said, well, I've been thinking for a long time, maybe the right thing for me to do is apply up to Atlanta and become a string teacher up there. I think I could do it. And so I got a hold of the Fulton County coordinator and told him I was interested. He said, well, this is what you'd have to do. You're not certified, but, granted, because you have an advanced degree, we would let you come in. You'd have to come in, you have to pass what they call the practice. It was like, your music education final test or something like that. You have to pass the practice. And then if you pass the practice you have 3 years to complete the other requirements to get your certification. And you did on. We would let you in, what they call a provisional certificate. So I applied and I went up and interviewed with the principal of the school I am now. I've been at the same school all these years. And she was fantastic. Elizabeth Fogarty, her name, was just great principal, great educator. And when I interviewed with her, I was planning on going the next year. But that job was going to not come up. Someone's going to take that job. I would end up somewhere different. But I really liked it. It was in May. It was like May 10th or something like that. I'm talking to Jay Richard, the coordinator, and he said, listen, you don't owe anything to Valdosta because they've had 6 years to give you a full-time job if they wanted to. It says, Webb Bridge, you can still come up next year, but Webb Bridge is not going to be available if that's the job you want. And he said, listen, he said, what's stopping you from going right now? I said, well, I don't know. I said, nothing. I said, I'm right on the phone right there. I said, I'll take it. I'll do it. And then, so I had to, in literally May, so June, July, and I started August 1st. So literally in a little less than 3 months, we had to sell one house, buy another house, get all our stuff ready, pack all our stuff into a truck, and move up 240 miles up the road. And, but it all worked out. And literally August 1st, we closed on new houses, the house we're in right to this day. And I remember calling, we closed, I went out for a pizza, got a pizza. It was back when you had payphones. And I called my dad to tell him we were in the house okay. And he says, James, let me get this straight. So you sold your other house? I said, yeah. He says, you closed on the new house and you're in the new house? I said, yeah. He says, everything's okay? I said, yeah. He says, James, don't ever do that again. But it all worked out, and I've been here ever since.
I'm so happy that my course, Beginners Classical Bass, is out in the world on Discover Double Bass, and we've been getting some great feedback. Here's Barry Green, instructor of bass at The Ohio State University, former principal bassist of the Cincinnati Symphony, and author of The Inner Game of Music. Barry writes about the course. This wonderful, extensive course includes 14 chapters of 66 lessons, varying in length from 1 to 8 minutes each. It is so comprehensive. While it is called a beginner's course, this only means that the course begins with the parts of the instrument, including how to take the bass out of the case. However, it also takes the player through the most advanced left and right hand techniques, including shifting, pivoting, harmonics, positions up to thumb position, tuning the bass, scales and arpeggios, as well as left hand techniques of dynamics, bow placement, articulations, including portato, staccato, and slurring. Barry, thank you so much. And folks, if you haven't checked it out, you can find it through the link in the show notes or just visit discoverdoublebass.com/Jason Heath. This episode is brought to you by Ear Trumpet Labs. These are hand-built microphones out of Portland, Oregon, and they make an excellent mic for upright bass called Nadine. Barry Green got to try out this mic at our 2020 online bass summit where Ear Trumpet Labs was a sponsor, and he was singing its praises all weekend long. It's an instrument-mounted condenser mic with an incredibly clear, natural sound and great feedback rejection. It's durable and works with in-ears, monitors, you name it. Not to mention, Christian McBride, Barry Bales, and Missy Raines are all Nadine users. Whether it's classical, jazz, Americana, or bluegrass, this mic seriously delivers, and they're offering a free t-shirt, especially to Contrabass Conversations listeners with a purchase of a mic. Just visit www.eartrumpetlabs.com/contrabass to claim yours and check out Nadine. So you were not expecting to do what you've been doing the last interval. Did you? What was the job? What was the job like getting it? Had you taught? I mean, you've been doing some conducting and such. As you had experience with ensembles, but working with middle school students is what was that like?
Well, just saying that the first year was hard because I had kids. I really high level kids. Like I tell people, between my middle school and Alpharetta High School, we teach at an Ivy League school, really, in the sense that most of the kids that come into our classes, if they don't end up at Yale or Harvard or something like that in college or at Georgia Tech, they're going for that. So that's usually the caliber kids. Not every kid, but a lot of them come in with that kind of serious attitude. So, and a lot of them take lessons. They end up at in All-State and stuff like that. So they're really serious players. But they're 12 years old and 13 years old, so they're a little goofy. So it took me a while, to kind of wrap my head around that these kids had all that ability were still going to do really goofy things. And but it took me about a year to get used to it. And once I got used to it, it's been no looking back since then. Middle school is really great. And when people ask me, well, how'd you go from college to middle school? I just tell them it took me about 6 years to come up with a group that had about the same maturity level as I did.
Well, it's amazing. I love playing. Back when I was teaching a full-time high school, I loved going out and playing gigs because I realized how much like high school orchestra all the gigs I was playing. I mean, like subbing in the San Francisco Symphony is not too different from the high school. I mean, like everybody's talking. They forgot their pencil. It's just it's funny how I think people look back on their middle school years. I know I did, as I remember those years as being kind of horrible, like just because you're developed. But like my experiences teaching that age have been really fun and satisfying, unexpectedly so. Because before I got into education, that would have been like I couldn't imagine a worse job you would have tried to put on me. But it was such a pleasure over the years, and it's so James, you'll have to stop me because I could talk about this for hours. But it's so interesting to me how different. I get if we just think about string education, how vastly different it is from in different parts of the country. I mean, people are listening to this. They might, if they aren't in the world that we inhabit, they might not realize the level of what we're talking about or have gone to Midwest. But I mean, Georgia, the Atlanta area, and a few other areas in the country, some parts of Texas, parts of suburban Chicago, a few other places, there are maybe like 5 to 8 hot zones in the U.S. and the level at which, I mean, I remember seeing a middle school honors orchestra from Las Vegas, Nevada, and they were playing at this level that was astonishing to me. I mean, I was just thinking, I felt like I was in a optical illusion or something. How can I be hearing music like this? Like I just didn't understand what was going on. It's really incredible. What's great. I mean, kids are kids, and it's great to teach wherever, but it's really an interesting scene that you're a part of there.
It is, and sometimes I have to kind of pinch myself to just, the idea, and like how I ended up here is luck of the draw.
Yeah,
I could have ended up anywhere, but I knew when I first came up to Atlanta. I remember sitting in Norcross High School in 1994 and listening to this school quartet play and working with the bass players, and thinking to myself, this is different than high school that I would have expected. This is not, this is a higher level than I would have imagined. And then I went to Walton High School. I went to all these other places, and it was exactly the same. And it's been like that. I just judged last year in February, just before the pandemic. I was a judge over in District 13, which is Gwinnett County, which is I was Norcross High School, and I'm blanking on something. But a lot of the bigger high schools over there, North Gwinnett High School, North Gwinnett Middle School, which is phenomenal. These teachers are phenomenal there. And I couldn't get over it. 3 days of just great playing, and great teaching, so I'm surrounded by it. And it's even where I live right now, I live only about a half mile from my school. And so I ride my bike to work, and I ride my bike to high school, And one time there was a youth orchestra that actually I'm part of now. I'm actually going to be retiring after this year. It's called Fulton County Youth Orchestra. Great group. But before I was one of the conductors, I used to like to go to the concerts. So they did their concert at Alpharetta High School. So I get up there, I drove my bike up to the high school about 10 of 7, because the concert would start at 7. And I got there, and they're not there. The concert had been moved. So I said, well, I wonder where they went. All right, so someone said, they're going to be at Chattahoochee, which is the next high school to the east of me. So I thought, by the time I go home and get the car, I could just ride over to Chattahoochee. So I ride to Chattahoochee, and they're not there. I said, what? Now, someone said, no, I think they're going to Northview. I said, well, Northview is about the same distance from where I am right now as my house would be. So I'm just going to ride to Northview. So I get on the bike, I ride to It's getting a little after 7 by now, And I get to Northview, of course, they're not there. I think they're at Johns Creek, because Johns Creek is the new high school. That's the place they're going to be, which is about a mile from Northview. So I ride down. So I get there about 7:25. I don't even miss the concert. The concert's still going fine. Right? And I've ridden my bike to all 4 of these high schools. That's how close they are. All 2,000 kids, all have been to Midwest multiple times. And that did. So it's mind-boggling when you think about it, but it's a pleasure to be a part of it. I'll just put it that way, And my colleagues are all really great people, great teachers, and kid after kid. I'm in my 21st year, so I've been here a long time, and I have a couple generations of kids. I've been fortunate to be part of their lives, and they've been part of my lives. And part of my life, and some of them still stay in touch, which is really kind of cool, and what they're doing and what they've accomplished, and it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that's so cool. You're making me nostalgic for those years that I had. I have like a little mini arc. I had 7 years of full-time high school teaching, and I wouldn't have left. It just, my life took me out to San Francisco, and one of the last things I did before I moved was my group played Midwest. So it's like hilarious to like bail on that, but
what a cool thing. I understand. And I was thinking about this today. You got to have a lot of good advice for teachers. When you took a group to Midwest. And just with your ability, from teaching, a lot of it's teaching, like in a sense, but a lot of it also is building up a rapport with the kids.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and you had to be amazing at that, just so that I imagine when you left, it was a big deal. Like, these kids did not want you to go.
Well, I didn't want to go either. It was one of those, like, I loved, there are some similarities to where I taught in suburban Chicago and where you're at in Atlanta. Several programs took groups to Midwest. Atlanta is like a whole nother level based on what I've seen, but still really strong programs and strong people. I was replacing someone who'd been there 30 years who was outstanding. He took his group to Midwest every 5 years, whatever that's the, and it was, I remember talking with some of these educators about like the cult, you're part cult leader, you're part musician, you're part, it's such a fascinating job. I did not want to leave that. The only reason I'm not doing it out here is because, again, how unequal this stuff is in the country. It's hilarious. You'd think that the San Francisco Bay Area would be awash in great school programs. No, that's not. It is a totally different world out here for reasons that nobody seems to be able to remember. But if we go back to again, I'll have to cut myself off because I could talk literally for 6 hours about this. It's one of my favorite topics. But if you talk to people back in the 50s and early 60s, there was a thriving music program scene like what you've experienced, what I experienced in Chicago, and through a whole bunch of factors, it's just not the case. Most programs, if they have orchestra, it's somebody teaching orchestra and band. There are many more youth orchestras outside of the schools than I experienced in Chicago. So it's just a different world. But long story short, I thought, I'll find another job. I looked, nope, no jobs. There was like nothing available. You look up in Illinois, what's open for 2014, 2015? There were like 75 string jobs. I look at the state of California, 40 million people. There were like like 2 string jobs, like 2, and they were both in LA. So it's just a different world. And I've looked into some things and I just thought this might be a snobby way to think about it, but I kind of felt like I was playing for the Bulls when I was teaching at that school. And I wasn't sure if, Bulls fans or not. I kind of felt like I was on that. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to play the same game with, maybe like a, minor league team or whatever the analogy. So,
well, it is different. But I will say this: having taught also in South Georgia, where again, great kids, but just a different culture, it was still very satisfying. And just to watch what the kids do, it's just, it's amazing what they do. That's really. And as far as middle school, my middle school days were kind of, I hate to think of them again. There's really kind of crazy time. But I think that's why we end up enjoying middle school so much. It's nice to go back in there and be like a support for these kids. We help you get these kids think it's okay to be kind of goofy.
This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the advanced music notation software from Steinberg. And one of the things that is a very intentional decision, but also a little perplexing if you're coming from other pieces of software, is that when you start, there's no time signature. It's just a single quarter rest. That opens the door for so much creativity. And here is Daniel Spreadbury, Senior Product Manager of Dorico, on why they made that design decision.
We really wanted to make it clear that when you start a piece of music in Dorico, it's really like starting from a blank piece of paper, no matter how true that really is in Sibelius and Finale, because of course you can change all those things, sometimes at a cost. If you've already written some music in Finale and then you change the time signature, you can have a lot of ties and all sorts of other stuff to clean up, which you won't have in Dorico. But it's just that kind of hopefully inviting. I mean, some people might say, it's a bit daunting. There's literally nothing there but 1 quarter rest. I've got to decide everything. But yes, you do. You're the creative person. You do have to decide everything.
This is one of the many design decisions that I think is totally brilliant in Dorico. It has opened the door for my own personal creativity, and it's such a beautiful product. I can't say enough good things about it. I use it every single day. There is a free version, Dorico SC, that gives you practically all the options that the full version of Dorico gives you, up to 2 stabs. So if you're doing bass duets or any kind of duets like that or exercises, that's more than enough. Dorico.com will take you to their page on Steinberg's website. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Every day when I sit down to practice, I get out my phone and I boot up Modasi, which is my practicing companion. And I have a specific routine I go through. And here is Modasi founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on what he does each day with Modasi.
What I do when I load Modasi every day is, if I don't have a playlist constructed already, what I do is I go in and I think, how long do I have to practice right now? Okay, I've got 40 minutes. Cool, I'm going to do 5 minutes on meditation, get my body state right. I'm going to do scales for 5 minutes, and I'm going to visualize, and I'm going to do this piece that I'm working on. You just set it up, see the budget, and follow the budget effortlessly by delegating that to the phone.
Letting my phone do all those logging details has been so great for my practicing. I can't recommend this app highly enough. Love it, love it, love it. Learn more at modasi.co. And we have a special offer if you go to our site for lifetime access to this app. It's so cool. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modasi. Well, the one thing I've kept I'm fortunate in that I've been able to go and do a lot of guest clinics because I work with Eastman Strings. I'm one of their product managers, and they send me out to do clinics. So one of the last things I did before getting locked down in San Francisco was I was in Pittsburgh visiting some high schools and doing some clinics. So I do get to do that still. But then the other thing I do, again, not during the pandemic, is my neighborhood middle school. I come in and do bass sectionals, and that keeps me. It's good to keep me feeling grounded. I'm like spending the morning emailing Gary Carr, and then I walk in and a kid runs full force with their backpack on right into my chest. Like boom! It keeps you humble.
No question about it. That's and good for you though for doing that. And and good for those kids. And again, when you end up in Atlanta, you'll come to my school. I'll get you. I definitely would love to have you. Kids would love to. And but the thing is, it's just. It reminds me of this is my favorite viola joke. I don't know if listening. But this kid comes in, my first, second year's kid comes into the room, he goes in the back room, he gets his speaker, comes running out, goes, hurry up. Somebody stole my viola. I said, Harry, I want you to sit back and just think about what you just said. And they came in here. They didn't take the computer. They didn't take the TV. They took your viola. That's what they really and the kid's he's sitting there scratching his head. So he gets back, he goes, Oh, I found it. Good, Harry.
That's such a kid way of looking at things. Like, how many times did I hear someone stole my music? And the answer is always, really now? Those music thieves that are taking your, grade 2.5 music. Maybe not. Well, yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait to meet in person, and I love to geek out on obviously bass, but also like the world of education, and it's I admire what you do and what folks like you do, and it's just so cool I get so inspired, even though I don't really do that anymore. When I go to Midwest or I go to the state conference and see these high performing groups, it's exciting.
Well, it's great, and it shows you the power of the music. You think, I've been hearing, since I started. I started late in life, but I'm still 40 years been playing the instrument now almost, and for 40 years I've been hearing about the quote graying of the American audience. Simply for symphony orchestras, and these great they couldn't. They're that old in 1982. They can't still be there anymore because someone else is filling these spots. And you go to the ASO, it's packed. I'm a regular attendee. I love the ASO. I love going, and it's packed. It's a shame. And now they are playing now, fortunately, but they're doing this kind of like a virtual series where they record it, during the week, and then it gets broadcast, on Thursday, and you get access to it like Thursday through Sunday or something like that. And they've done some really neat things. They've done Beethoven 1. They've done things you wouldn't normally hear them play, like Bach Orchestral Suite. They did this Siegfried Ideal, Wagner. It's beautiful, just beautifully done. But it's not the same as being in the hall with them. It's just great what they do, and but it's packed. So and you go and you hear these groups, these kids, little kids, 14, 15 years old, playing music, at this unbelievable level. So, and all over the place. There's just so that, again, you don't want to be complacent. I think it's still important to be, to be, fighting for the, kids. Kids should have access to music, and there's still places where kids can't study, can't play an instrument for financial reasons, and we want to obviously try and solve that. But there's a lot of programs out there. There's a lot of people really excited about it.
Well, I can't wait to check out the Atlanta Symphony. I'd love to check out a concert. That's been my experience here in San Francisco too. That there's that sort of misconception of the graying of the audience, and that's true in some cases. But I go to these concerts and they're also packed and all different kinds of ages. Not that it's so it's been fun for me to be a little bit more of a patron since moving out here, because I was always either teaching or at the other high school ensemble concert or gigging, and so moving out here has sort of cleared out some space, and so it's been really fun to just be an audience member and see a really good concert from the audience.
The funny thing with me, when I moved up here, I was friends with Doug. I knew him, so I went a couple times, but I didn't really go that much because I was busy doing stuff. And then my son got older, when they do something special, the ASL chorus is very renowned. So they did the Missa Solemnis when he was in 5th grade. My son was in 5th grade. So I took him, I said, we're going to go to hear this, And the pieces I don't hear that much. So I would always go to those. And we heard the St. Matthew Passion one time, it was, 8, 10 years ago, and it was just phenomenal. So then my son joined the ASYO, the NSW Youth Orchestra. So then he started getting free tickets. So I started going all the time. I'm saying it was at that point, I'm really trying to focus on my group, and I go, I love to hear bass, I love to hear the music, but also I love the ensemble. There's such an incredible ensemble, and if when I watch them, it's like you hear groups sometimes that are really tight, but they're a little conservative. They don't really, just play. You hear groups that really play, but they're just not quite as tight. ASO is tight, and they play. Especially you hear them play Shostakovich, it's just unbelievable. There's a few things. They do everything great, but there's a few things where they just really take it to another level. And I've heard Shostakovich 10, 7, and 5 in the last 3 or 4 years, and just I couldn't tell you which one's better. It's incredible. And you watch the concertmaster. And I talked to him, I got, unfortunately, because I know Joe, I got to go to rehearsal 3 or 4 years ago. Because they don't usually have open rehearsals. But I asked what's going on, see what, and I told my students, I'm going to ASO rehearsal today. I'm going to tell you what I see. I'm going to go back. Because I do this to my kids every single fall. First day of school, I put on a recording of some great orchestra. I say, why don't we play like that? Why don't we play like that? And always I get the answer, well, they're professionals on Barket. I said, well, I know that they're professionals, but the music we play is, the music they play is about equal to their level. but we're not playing that music. We're playing music that's by equal to our level. Why don't we play it like they play that? And invariably we talk about it. Invariably we come back to the same conclusion. We don't sound like that because we just don't want to. We just don't do what it takes to sound like that. But how are we going to fix that? Then that's good. So then I tell them, listen, I go all the time to the ASL and I watch what they do. And granted, I know they're paid and all that stuff, but they're they're professional and they want to make great music regardless of their salary. And they're not sitting there playing, thinking, if I miss this, I'm going to deduct $5 or something. They're focused on making music. And you watch the concertmaster. His name is David Kushrai. He's an incredible violinist, and he's tall anyway. But you watch him when he gets ready, like. He looks behind him. He puts his bow very deliberate. And watch him do a pizzicato. It's like I could sit there. I could do that pizzicato with him because I know exactly where it's coming. And so I was at this rehearsal one time, and I talked to Michael Kurth after. He stopped by and said hello to me. And I said, you guys make this look easy. I said, it's incredible. And he said, well, it's we've done it a long time. It's like if you put me in a classroom, it would be hard for me for a while until I get used to it. And I said, well, let me just ask you a couple of things. So this is a guest conductor that day. So it's a guest conductor. So obviously you came to 2 days, you're just not going to learn to follow him. How do you do this? He says, 100%. He says, for cutoffs and for attacks, we watch the concertmaster. And it's just clear. So I watch them. I watch every single principal. I watch their eyes. I watch where they're looking, what they're doing. And I try to remember that. When I'm with my group, I hardly ever conduct my group now when I'm teaching them. I conduct a couple days before the concert, maybe a day before the concert. What I'll do is I'll walk around, usually with a violin, and I'll sit in some set of viola, and I'll sit in some section, and it's all on the concertmaster. You got to look, it's either he or she, you got to look at that. Right now, my 8th grader is a she. You got to look at her, and she's great. This girl's phenomenal. Just once in a while. Again, sometimes you get kids, it's a little hard for them. This girl is just like out of this world. She's this brilliant player, and she has learned really to look around and to really cue these kids. And that's really what they need. They need to learn to listen to each other. When they look at each other, they're listening to each other and they're focused. And they can see like when they're, my bow's here, but that person's bow is there. If they're just staring at their music, or if I'm, up there, doing this. Now, if I'm right in front of them, that first 5 or 6, it's good for them because I can get right in their eyes. But they don't really need me, those 5 or 6 in that first row. It's the guy back there, 3rd, 4th row. He needs me. But I'm 8 feet from him. If I yell for low second finger to somebody 20 feet away, he's not paying attention. If I sit down right next to him, I say, listen, you hear this? Yeah. And then he's paying attention now. And then you look around. So I find that I'm much more effective that way. Walking around the room, sitting next to kids, talking to kids, saying, watch, all right, we're going to start. You watch that first person. I don't care what is happening. I don't care what I'm doing. If I'm on the podium, I'm doing all these things. I'm going to make this great cutoff. Listen, when her bow comes off the string, there's no more sound. I don't care what I'm doing. But that is that's your cue. And they have bought into that, and they've done it, and really they've done a remarkable job. And it's much more fun for me this way too.
Yeah, isn't that interesting how the students can buy into that and realize when it's one of their peers? I had a very similar experience. I started to do I wish I'd done it more than 7 years because I felt like I was just starting to get my sea legs. But I would try to take one piece per concert for my string when it was not full orchestra, it was just strings, and have them completely do it by themselves and put the onus on the concertmaster like that. And that became an education for that student too. Like how do I control this? And you see the people that are maybe 4 or 5 rows. I always had large groups, so it was like this wave of 60 players. So like my smallest group was always like 55 to 60. So I was like, "Hello back there," if you're up front, and that was just so putting that focus on the concertmaster was so helpful. I did several times Michael Doherty's Strut for Strings, which is a great piece for your top group would sound great on it, but even like a kind of middle group at the sort of programs we're talking about. I did that, and I would do it with no conductor, which is the sort of piece that people would think is crazy to do with no conductor because it's all offbeats and stuff like that, like stuff string players don't tend to do well. But it was really interesting. I actually did it a couple of years with different groups, and they walked out there by themselves, no podium up there. They just played the thing down. It was really it was so cool to. I wonder how many Well, that's the fun thing about going to rehearsal, isn't it? To see how these people work, and then the lessons you learn there. You obviously realize you're taking them back to your students, but I think people who do go to concerts at the highest level, they do take those lessons back to their students. I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, when I look at some of the top directors that I've gotten to know, one of the things they seem to have in common is that they do go to concerts. The guy I replaced at my last job, he would go to the Chicago Symphony at Ravinia in the summer, like every single concert. He had the Frank Listina spot. It was right up front, and he would watch. And I remember being a fly on the wall watching him teach, and he would bring in what the Chicago Symphony does to these rehearsals. And that group, I mean, it's a good school. They should play well, but I think they played better than they were punching above their weight class. I think in part because of just that higher level wisdom that Frank was bringing in.
Yeah, no, there's no question about it. And you think about it, and I go to workshops, I do a lot of different things, but when you hear high-level musicians in person, there's nothing like that. There's just nothing like that. And you get to a certain age, and you really need that, like in a sense. I've been playing a long time, and I play the bass every day. I try to get better every single day, and but it helps me to hear really top-notch players. And just from listening to podcasts, I'm trying to be much more deliberate now in my practice. I tape myself every week now, no matter what, even if I'm not, I just tape, I listen to it, and again, I try everything I possibly could think of to improve. But going and hearing these absolute great players is really, it just keeps that in my ear. When I'm playing with the metronome, for example, I kind of developed this thing now where, I used to play, I get always just a little ahead, I'd be steady in the same place, but just a little ahead. And I'm thinking, why am I doing that? Because I'm thinking this metronome is this click, but that's not how I do it. If you watch the ASO, they're not, they're playing with each other. Now I think of the metronome as another member of the ensemble. Am I with that? Am I ahead of that person by a tiny bit? Am I with that person? And that has got me much more focused.
Oh man, my wife has said so many times to me, it's interesting how you practice a 16th note ahead of the metronome, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, think about bass. I think one thing that does it is, it's just, when you're articulating these low strings, your fear is that you're not going to get it to speak right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you got to develop that confidence of it's going to be right there. And again, for me, what has helped is watching people play, and watching and then it just sits right there, and they do it. And does that mean I'm going to do it automatically? Absolutely not. I got to really focus on it. But it helps me to have that in my ear. That's what I'm trying to do.
It's interesting. It's so cool to hear that you play the bass every day. That's something that I do now because I changed what I do career-wise. But I really struggled with that when I was teaching full-time. I played enough gigs and I still taught it to Paul. So like my sense of professional pride was keeping me from sinking too far down. But one thing I did notice through those years of teaching, I'd love your thoughts on this, is when I was in that cycle where I was practicing every day and going to rehearsals and stuff, I know I was a better teacher on that podium. And it's hard to articulate why, because I was thinking about scores and looking at scores and doing arrangement. I was doing music stuff, with my time anyway, but there was something about actually playing on that instrument daily. It made me think about sound in a way that was maybe more helpful for the students. I don't know if you've noticed that, if you've ever taken some time off from practicing, or just, it felt like it kept me grounded.
Well, I would just say that I definitely can believe that, because the thing is, you're and again, I call myself an orchestra teacher, not an orchestra director, and I'm very deliberate about that. And the reason is, again, at a higher level, like the high school teacher, his top ensemble, he's directing that ensemble, because those kids, they know what to do. He's just got to direct them and make sure they do it when they're supposed to do it. Yeah, but hey, I'm teaching. My kids generally don't know what to do, even my highest level kids, because they're just too young. So that if I think of myself in a different way, I don't relate to them the right way. And actually, I've learned to play, and I'm not a good violinist, but I'm here in my home studio. I'm teaching from home. I get my violin and viola right here. And I've learned to play these instruments, and they're hard for me, especially violin is really hard for me. But I find, I tell the kids, listen, because I'm standing in front of them with a violin sometimes, I say, listen, I'm not. When I teach you bass, I've been playing bass for such a long time. Sometimes things come kind of, automatic, and I've learned them a long time ago. And it's a little bit difficult for me to exactly explain how you go about developing them. It's not like that with violin. I'm learning violin the same time you're learning violin. So if I tell you to try this, it's not because someone at some workshop said do this. It's because I've been practicing this for the last 3 days, and it sounds better when I do this. Yeah. And this is hard for me, like it's hard for you. So I think that when we're teaching kids to play, that if we are playing, that it makes a difference. That in a sense you're thinking. And also, I practice at school a lot too. Like I'll practice. I used to bring my bass into school, but then it started getting scratched up too much, and I couldn't ride my bike the days I brought it in. So I started just leaving home, and I started playing the school basses, which was a much better idea because now I know what they're feeling. Like I'm playing. My bass is back here. It's a beautiful. It was made in 1991 for the 91 Mittenwald convention in ISB convention. It's made in the Philippines, but it was Romeo Gabuto is the name inside. But this Canadian guy Jacques Gagnon was like the designer of it. It's a copy of the Modasi bass. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I've heard about that maker. Yeah, wow.
And I love it. I played. It's funny that I bought it actually when I was in Vienna. And I'll get back to this other story in a minute. I'm getting distracted, but it's worth hearing this. I bought it when I was in Vienna. I was looking at my bass, my original bass. I had this kind of Jusek, Czech bass. It was also a very nice bass. I loved it, but it got just damaged on the plane when I came home my first year, and it was damaged beyond repair. I took it to Lou DeLeon to Haven. He said, "Nice." He said, "Listen, you guys got to total it, and he said, "One, I'll pay you. I'll buy the neck, from you." And I just got the insurance money. I just let him have the neck. And so I had this insurance money. Back to Vienna. Nice thing about Europe is you don't need to have a bass. In the Hochschule where I studied, there was a bass there. I could play that bass. If you played gigs, every church you go to, there's a bass there. I basically traveled on my boat. So I was not in a hurry. I was just trying basses, and I was hoping I could maybe buy a Viennese bass. But they're super expensive, and people don't like to let them out of Vienna. But they're beautiful basses. One day, I don't know. If things go right, I will buy one of those basses just to have it. But I was looking around, and then this guy was from the Philippines who knew the bass. He was another student at the Hochschule. He said, "Listen, go talk to this guy. His name was Bradley. Actually, he was an American guy who works as a luthier in Vienna." And he said, "Go talk to him. You think he's got a bass?" So I called him, and he came over, and he had this little hut where he did his work. It wasn't much bigger than the room I'm in right now. And I walked in, he gives me this bass. And he said, it was made in 91. This is 93, like fall of 93 when I go in. And he said, people have liked it, but it's a non-European bass. And there's so many good European basses around here, people just are not interested in. So I played the open A string. I was like, I want this bass. This is the bass I want right now. And my wife with me, she said, "You just can't do that. You can't play one note and say it's your bass. You got to play it for a bit." And so we agreed. I paid him a little money, and I took it for a month. But I knew when I took it home, I wasn't bringing it back. Since then, when kids have asked me, I'm going to go buy a new bass, I tell them it's just like buying a car. You decide your price range. You play every bass in that price range. You're going to pick up one. You're going to play a couple notes. You're going to say, "This is it." And that's the one you get. Because, as long as you go into a quality place, no one's going to, you're going to pay money for your instrument, but no one's going to steal it from you. You're going to charge money that you shouldn't charge. And I'll look at it with them. But essentially, they're all kind of similar, especially so many good basses are being made nowadays. But there's going to be that one where you're going to play it and you're going to say that, this works for me. And that's that bass. I've never, ever looked back. I'm getting close to, 30 years with it now, almost, in 23. So I used to take it to school, but I stopped doing that. But now I play the school basses. But the thing about the school basses, which has really opened my eyes, is when I first started playing, they're all full of rosin. They're all cruddy, because I'm not keeping track of them and I'm not making the kids. So I cleaned them all up. I went in there, I just spent a summer, I cleaned them all up and I played them. And now I play a different bass every morning when I go in. The kids, when they come in the room, they see me practicing. That's the first thing I'm showing them when they come in the room in the morning, put their instruments away. And the bass players, I tell them, "Listen, look at this bass. You see this bass?" And I say this bass, I show it. And they do, but they're not perfect at it, but they do a much better job taking care of them now. Because now they know, I've shown them what to do. Otherwise, I never paid attention. They were all, my basses are old. They've been there a long time. There's some little chips around the edges and stuff like that. But as far as setup and cleanliness and playability, I would put my 4 basses that I have in my room up against anybody else's basses anywhere. They're in good shape.
It's amazing how you could forget about your basses, even being a bass player. I had the same exact thing. I would go back and I would be like, oh no, what's going on back here? I felt like such a bad teacher, especially since that's my instrument. But that's really cool that you do that and keep them. Yeah, I could see how the students would reciprocate and keep it cleaner and everything. That's really cool.
And that has worked out nice. But then I ride my bike every day. So I'm on the bike. So it's funny because I love cars too, but I drive only a couple times a week.
There's nothing like getting to your job by your own 2 feet, whether it's biking or walking or anything like that. When I sub in the San Francisco Symphony, I always walk, and people think I'm nuts. And I do it with my bass, but then I leave my bass there for the week. But it's about a 45-minute walk. I've got a wheel. It's not a problem, and I feel great. Walk for about 45 minutes. Walk in, get a drink of water, have a little coffee, play some notes. It's such a better version than sitting in the car and getting stressed or all that kind of business. I always was a little too far from my schools to buy. I could technically bike, but the weather in Chicago's a little bit different than the weather in Georgia.
I will say that. I've been up there a few times from Midwest, and there was one time I was up there. It was around zero.
Yep.
And I was thinking. I remember. It was getting ready to go. We were watching Sunday Night Football, and they were in Green Bay, and it was something that was like -5. I said to my wife, I know Green Bay's a little further north than Chicago, but it's basically, let's say 10 degrees. So it's 5 degrees in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And it's like 45 degrees here at nighttime, 55, 60 in the day. I said, Jen, what am I doing? why am I doing this? But I love it.
Yeah, it's no joke. I don't miss that cold at all. I miss a lot of things about Chicago. It's a great town, but I'm looking at my palm tree right outside, and I'm walking out in flip flops, taking the dog out in January. I'll take it. I knew this would happen, James. I knew we'd talk, educate. I have to ask you about this book, although I gotta. Okay, oh, you got it right there. So how does, now I know a little bit better, but my question was like how did you find yourself doing this translation? Well, first of all, I should say thank you, because I feel like there's not that, you would know much more than me, but I'm doing more and more bass related research for some video projects and the like, and I really run out of resources pretty quick. I've got, is it Paul Brew? I forget how you pronounce his name, but his new history of the double bass. And then I've seen Planyavsky mentioned many times, and then I saw, it is translated in English, and I got it, and then saw your name, and here we are chatting.
I really appreciate it, and you should know too that a German edition came out the same year that we did the English translation.
Oh, okay.
He had a smaller brochure he came out with. I'm guessing in the late 80s, 89, 87, 89, somewhere around there. And that's the one I intended to translate. But then when I got the contract and he knew I was going to translate it, he redid it into this German version, which is, who publishes it? I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's a nice, almost exactly the same book. And then the English one came out. And it's funny because I met Planyavsky when I got there, but I had written to him before I came, because when you get, just if anyone's out there who's thinking about doing a full ride, I can give you a couple of things just to know that everyone has a good proposal, so that's step one. But step two is you have to really have some contacts there in the place you're going. If you want to go to a place, where no one else applies, it's a different story. If you want to go to a place like Vienna or London or somewhere where everyone's going to be applying, a lot of people are going to be applying those spots. Not only you need to have some contacts there, and you also need to be kind of guaranteed that you're going to matriculate at some type of institution. And I didn't know that. I was just lucky. I was lucky to get mine. But but when I got there, I was basically told I had to. That's how I ended up studying bass there, because I didn't necessarily intend to study bass necessarily. I wanted to do research. I was trying to do research for my doctoral dissertation, and I wanted to do things with Planyavsky. But unfortunately, because playing bass there also changed my life. It was great. I studied with Josef Niederhammer. Herbert Meyer. Herbert Meyer was one of the principal bassists of Vienna, and Josef was principal of the Symphonic of the Vienna Symphony and also the Munich Symphony under Charles Budwell. He was principal bass. And he has all kinds of stories. Again, if ever you're interested in interviewing some Austrian players, I can put you in touch with them. And I'll tell you what, they all speak great English, and it's an amazing world.
I would love to. Well, let's shoot me some names, and I'll make it happen. I would absolutely love to.
Definitely. And so I wrote him, asked him if he would have some time for me when I got to. He said yes. And then so I ended up getting this full ride. So I get there and I called him. And he didn't remember me, that I'd written him. But he's this type of guy. He said, well, listen, he was called Herr Kollege. You always, and no matter who you were, if you were a bass player, you were Herr Kollege. So you were his colleague. I was a little kid. I was nowhere near his colleague, but here's how he dressed. He said, okay, well, it's just, come over. He gave me directions to his house. So I got there and I talked to him, and it was clear that he was interested in helping me. And so he not only that, but he was interested in showing us Vienna. Because he knew we were there also, as visitors, we wanted to get the most out of the city. So he made a point to show us things, to take us places. And it was really incredible. And like I said, in my email, he's a very serious scholar. Like I said, I say he's not a professional scholar, but he's serious about what he does. So the thing is, and one thing that really upset him a lot is when people would not communicate with him. It's like, the whole big thing with this, I can sum up his point of view in a nutshell. And there's still controversy over the violone. But I will say this, especially after watching the presentation this summer of Rob Nairn, he's really like people like that who really are doing it. These are people that really know about I translate this book and I dabble in it, but I'm not I'm not really a early music scholar. But I was so impressed with that presentation he gave over the summer. So anyone who gets in touch with me with the book, I put him in touch with Rob Nairn. I'm sure there's many others, but I just said that's just the name that comes up based on what I saw. But anyway, from what I can gather from watching things, it's still kind of it's the cello thing. When is it okay to be the cello? When it's okay not to be the violone? And Planyavsky's whole point is, listen, from the early 1500s, there's these instruments that are this size that were called violone that were being made. So why would we think that the term violone would be anything else? And he goes on and he spends his time, basically going and drawing up sources of instruments, drawing up sources of how music was written and how it was published, and trying to determine, really what it was intended for and why these instruments would work. And there's one scholar in particular, I'm not going to bring up his name. I'm stepping out. He goes, I want to get this other book. I think I have it over here. This is the book that also it's worth. I've just knocked over 3 other books. This is Lawrence Dreyfus. It's called Bach's Continuo Group. And I highly recommend this book because what he does, he looks at every single Brandenburg concerto and looks at the instrumentation, looks at the instruments, what they're called, and he determines what instrument should be in the continuo group. Based on it's really very well. It's from Harvard Press from late 80s, I want to say.
What is the title of that book again?
Bach's Continuo Group.
Okay, cool. Okay, I'll check it out.
And it's definitely worth it. And I will say this, that I don't recall seeing anything in here that contradicted what Planyavsky, right? Now, again, it was over 20 years I was doing this research, so if I've forgotten something, please forgive me. But I didn't see anything in there that really conflicted. And I will say this, I put this in the introduction, that Planyavsky approaches this subject from the point of view of a double bass player. Now, think about this. We play bass now, for a long time, both of us. Have you not ever been in a situation where someone says, listen, we don't want the bass there. Bass doesn't play that. And someone gives you a part, you can play it. A bass can't play that. That's it. Have you ever heard that happen to you?
Oh, a few times. Once or twice.
So, how many times have we been determined what we can do? Now, I'm not saying, that maybe it's true. Maybe I can't play that. But I would like to determine that for myself, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, even middle school music, there are so few times I give out bass parts. Sometimes, if it's really necessary. But 9 times out of 10, I'll give out the cello part because the typical middle school bass part is copy of the cello part until something interesting happens. And then bass plays pizzicato and cello plays whatever's interesting. Mm-hmm. And that's what we are told from the first day we pick up the instrument. Yeah. Sorry. I'm trying to keep my computer on. There's a video I want to tell you about. I don't know if you.
Yeah, no worries. But
that's what we're told, and it's so all of this history has been written by non-bass players who just see things and assume non-bass wouldn't do that, and they don't say it like that, but that's what they're thinking. It. And here comes Planyavsky, who's a bass player who contradicts them. So there was some controversy, and he would write. He was not at all afraid to debate He was interested, and if he was wrong, he would say, "Thank you for the correction, thank you for the information." But it really bothered him when people would not communicate. When they would write, like this one scholar would always contradict him in print, but would never answer his letters, and that really bothered him. So he kind of developed this style, really kind of almost a defensive writing style, which I suppose when I did the translation, I probably could have tried to couch it a little bit, but I just felt it was important to write what he was as close as I could to what he was saying. And I'm just a translator. I'm trying to, and he actually read through the whole thing too. His English is not perfect, but he knew it well enough to read it. And he would tell me when he didn't like things. So that and that's just his nature. As a scholar, as a player, this is the person who's been at the highest level of music in Vienna since the time he was a 12-year-old kid or 9-year-old kid when he joined the Vienna Sängerknaben, the Vienna choir boys. He's been at the forefront of Viennese music. So, he has high regard and high standards, and he is going to tell you what he thinks. But he does. I remember one time even I had trouble with the book. I was almost finished with it. And my publishing company wanted endnotes, and he didn't know that. So I sent him this whole mail, and that was back when I sent it to him in the mail. He got it in the mail and sent me a fax. And I got it. I'm about to sit down just before Christmas and enjoy it reading. The next day, I got another fax. Where are the footnotes? I wanted footnotes. You have endnotes. He goes, redo this thing with them. So I had to get permission from the publisher. Can I do footnotes, please? Yes. But then I had to change the whole layout. Like all those pictures, you had to put it to the publisher camera ready. So I had to fix my old 1990s Macintosh. I had to fix all that whole layout. The several hundred pages. It was not easy to do. And then, I had a job too. I had to work. So I did. It came out later than we expected, because it took me a long time. And I remember the summer. I saw him the summer before that, and he said, he told me point blank that he expected this to be published by now, and he was disappointed that it was taking this long. And I explained to him, I would have had it. If you would have been okay with endnotes, we'd have had it published, 6 months ago. But he ended. He said this: "Wir sind noch Freunde," which means we're still friends. So he was very stern with me. I remember we was up on top of his, he had this roof you could go up and you could look at and see like all of Vienna. We were up on the roof and he took me aside. We're up there drinking wine. He's having fun with our wives stuff. Sends the wives downstairs, and he tells me point blank, this is what he thinks. He wishes it was out sooner, and he's really disappointed. But he's telling me professionally what he wants. But listen, he could tell I was a little hurt. He said, "Listen, we're still friends. Don't worry about that." That's nature. He writes in a very, very direct manner, but he's one of the warmest people. It was one of the warmest people you would ever meet. And he was clear on both of those things. So I just want to make it. One day I will do this. I have this whole article written. I just have to finalize it. I need to find a way to send it to ISB so people get a glimpse of who he was as a man. He was really a wonderful man. And he did so many things for the instrument, not just the book, but he has this archive in Vienna that he's collected music. It's still there. You can still go and in the library there, you can find all kinds of different editions, old, first editions that are not reprinted anymore, pieces by Modasi, Doubt, all these old Viennese bass players. He traces in his other book, which, one day I would love to translate that. It's many 700 pages. It would take it.
I was going to ask. I'm so sad that book isn't translated, but that's a large project, though. Wow.
Yeah, because I've often thought about it, but it would be several years of just doing that. But at the same time, it really should be just and it's older now. Again, anything research has changed so much. Anything that's been out, this book has been out over 20 years. So whenever people write, this is not the end all be all. There's many things that have come up now that are new compared to when we did this. But at the same time, just the historical nature of it, and and just the things that he uncovered at that time, it's just worth seeing. And so maybe I will do it one day. It's hard to say, but the thing is, as serious as he was, he was just such a warm person and such a generous person. He wanted to do things with the bass. He wanted, and he invited anyone who's interested in doing something with him. He invited them in. And at that time, in the 80s and 90s, it was not the ISB right now is this great collective of individuals, and but we didn't always have that. Back when I first was growing up, starting bass in the early 80s, there were kind of some schools that were, kind of their own school and were not really interested in what was going on with that other school, in a sense. And he was one of the first people to bridge that and bring these different schools together, and let people hear what people are doing in other places. And so that's important contribution that he made.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about how recent that sort of more open nature has been among. I was actually literally today talking with Hal. I was interviewing Hal Robinson and a couple of his former students. They've got this WA-based institute, so we were talking about that. But the topic came up, like Hal's been teaching for decades, and just how that's changed in his teaching career, from the people who were jealously guarding their students and didn't want you to take in any other ideas than your own, and how that really has, globally, there's been a big change for a variety of reasons. I'm sure in recent decades, the internet has helped and just more access to information. But it was Hal put it in a really great way. There's nobody owns knowledge. Knowledge is just, it's like this river that just flows and you tap into it. And but that wasn't I think I brought up back, the bebop era, people who used to like hide their hands when they were playing piano solos because they didn't want you to try to copy their ideas, right? So it's just interesting how that it's cool to know how Planyavsky was in terms of that.
Yeah, he was. That was just anyone who approached him, his door was open to you. When I came to him, I was this young kid, trying to finish his doctorate. We hadn't done anything in the field at that time, and he opened this door. I was Herr Kollege. I was, and it's like that same thing. Jerry Fuller and I went back one time in the late '90s and spent a couple of days in the archive, and then we published a couple articles in ISB. Actually, we were going to do a presentation. I think Jerry did it. I sent my videotape because we were scheduled to be at the 1999 ISB convention, and my son was born that same week, so I didn't end up going.
Yeah.
So I sent the videotape. I think he said he played. I can't remember now, but I know he did his half of the presentation.
Yeah.
But it was really terrific because he didn't know Planyavsky. Planyavsky knew of his work and he knew Planyavsky work, but they didn't know each other. And same thing, they might have been best friends, like in a sense. He took him right in, and just that just was his nature. Anyone who wanted information from him, it was available if he had the time.
I was just looking at an article you co-authored with Jerry on the earlybass.com, I think is the website, which is hilarious. I actually used to host that website. Well, Jerry and I go way. I mean, we know so many people in common, James. Jerry and I taught one of Jerry's sons bass all through middle school and high school, and I still stay with Jerry and his wife occasionally when I come to Chicago. So he's been a great friend and colleague. I've played many a gig with Jerry over the years too. So.
Well, I really just spent that one short time with him, and then after that, I ended up coming up here, and I've been out of the bass history role, like in a sense. But he's just a terrific guy, and obviously terrific colleague and terrific contributor to the instrument and to the knowledge.
Yeah.
So please tell him, give him my regards.
I will, and I can't wait to check out this. Yeah, the ISB it'd be great to get that article out there and learn more about, because Planyavsky's he's a name that I've known for ever since I've been playing. I've heard that name, but I don't know how I didn't realize that there was this English translation. I guess I've just had so much time during the pandemic. I've been doing more bass research, so I'm
so glad you came across it. Yeah, it was neat, and I think again, I the big thing for me, is just I wanted people to get to know what he's doing, number one, and then I also would like people to know a little bit more about him, because again, sometimes in the book he comes down kind of hard on some other ideas, and not that he's opposed to just he didn't like people putting forth ideas without good, clear documentation that he had. And the other thing is, because he was not a professional scholar, we're all like this a little bit, we're teachers, this person comes into our classroom, that person, okay, but not really a teacher, professional players, that guy's not really a player, and same, the scholars are like this too, what kind of scholarship is that person really done? Right. And so that he doesn't always get taken seriously because, he was not a professional scholar. In a sense. And I remember I went to Salzburg one time. He did a little presentation there at the European String Teachers Association, and there were people that challenged him, but the same thing, he listened to them very carefully, he answered their questions, and it was great to see him doing that. But it was clear that people came into that meeting, into that session, wanting to basically outsmart him, like in a sense. But he stood his ground. I'll just say. But this video I wanted to bring your attention to. It's Mahler Symphony No. 4 with Bernstein and the Vienna Philharmonic. And at this time, I'm guessing it's from the early 70s, maybe late 60s. the striker is playing his principal bass, and Planyavsky is assistant principal.
Really? I will check that out.
There's several shots where they're playing together. It's just and they were also great colleagues, but obviously two big, strong-minded people in the same city, in the same orchestra. I'm sure there are little things that happen here and there.
Yeah, I'll bet.
I know bits and pieces of them, but still, you look back on these people, and what they did and what they accomplished, and it's really amazing, mm-hmm. And just I was fortunate to witness some of it, and get some firsthand knowledge of some of it. So, and again, I can't tell you why. It just was good luck. It's just I haven't been in the right place at the right time. Just like when I ended up, in Gary Carter's, studio in Hartford, Connecticut in the '80s.
Isn't that crazy?
Steve Reeves was there that year. That first year I was there, it's incredible. It's like a list of podcasts. And Steve, I listened to his interview, and he was, and I didn't realize he's only a few years older than I am, because it's not that he doesn't look older. I'm not saying that, but just when we were students, he just seemed older. Mm-hmm. Because mm-hmm. he had such wisdom. Mm-hmm. He was kind of like the father of the bass, the bass group there, all the bass students, because he just had this wisdom about him. He knew sort of what to do, and he had this instinct, and you knew you could talk to him, you could trust what he said. It was great to hear his interview, because he's still the same guy. He just kind of exudes this just wisdom. It's really amazing. But he was in the studio there. Dave Murray's in the studio. Milton Masciadri, who teaches over here at the University of Georgia, mm-hmm. he was in the studio that year. And this is my first year playing bass. I walked in all these great players. And several others, just hard to name them all, But it was really, that for me, if you were to pick a turning point, year in my life, I would point to that one. Where I was I came from this kid, literally took my first bass lesson in April. And then in September, I was surrounded by this incredible bass class that didn't treat me. I mean, they understood I was just starting, but they basically came. I would go to master class, and we did these exercises. We did vomiting, all these things, and they didn't say, listen, you do this version. They said, listen, take up your bass and just play, and you do the best you can. Mm-hmm. And that's how I learned. And it was the best thing for me. I just watched them, and I listened, and I tried to play, and it took me several months so I could understood all the exercises. But I'll say that this is just something I know Gary very well. The thing about Gary, and the great thing about studying with him, is things I was 40 years ago that he told me, that he demonstrated, I still think about. Mm-hmm. And I think about every day when I'm teaching my kids and middle school kids. He was so right about this, how to make sound, how you do something. And you think of Gary was a musical player, musical teacher. Mm-hmm. And just I know you don't have all night, but I want to just touch on this thing because I've heard several episodes you talk about college and the worthwhileness of going to college and whatnot. And I'll just say this: you have to be aware of how much it costs, and you obviously can't go somewhere where you don't have the money to spend for it. There are people that have $200,000, whatever you have to spend, and there's no problem. They should go there and get that experience. But I will say this. I kind of, leveraged my college education financially for a little bit. I was graduated my master's in '86 with $36,000 of debt, which at that time was quite a bit of debt. Mm-hmm. But I ended up paying it off. And I'll tell you what, I wouldn't trade my experiences for anything. But I didn't go to school to get a job. I went to school because I really wanted to learn. I would have studied music no matter what. That's what I wanted to study. And what I got out of going to school was all that knowledge, and then all these experiences of getting to go to Vienna and stuff like that. But being around someone like Gary Carr, you can't put a price tag on that. Right. You just can't. And I think back many years later, I think of these things that he had this thing he does called planes bowing, where you kind of bow on one side of the string and you up bow on the other side of the string. And I didn't understand it for years and years and years. He would try to explain. He said, I would try to do this. No, not quite. And just maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it kind of clicked. Mm-hmm. And I remember I used to watch the tip of my bow as I do this. And you can see how his bow was moving. It wasn't moving this way, it was moving this way. Yeah. He's getting this clear articulation. And it just took me 30-something years, but I finally got interested. But I remember that, and I understand. And the thing with Gary is he wasn't like a job teacher, like you got to do this to get a job. He was a musical teacher. So when you come in, it's funny because students will come to me now, and they'll come in. I'll say, "How come you're doing an upload there?" "Well, this is in the addition." Or, "Well, my old teacher took me an upload." Well, if you went into one of Gary's lessons and he asked you why you were bowing something a certain way, and your answer was because your former teacher told you to do that, or because that's what the addition said, and you had no musical reason for why you were doing it, you were in for a long lesson that day. Mm-hmm, I just say, he demanded that you thought about things, and you thought about, why you're doing this way. And it was hard. It was really hard because, especially for a young person, I had to really think, like, why am I doing that? But that was, and if you listen to him play, this is the thing that's amazing is he demonstrates there's not a single ounce of sound that he ever makes that's not thought out. Mm. It's the most amazing thing, and I still listen, he has this documentary it's on YouTube now. I remember when they made it, he was at Hard School Music. It was like my first or second year. And Steve Reeves, and there's a bunch of people in it that I know. It's called Amazing Bass. I don't know if you've seen it up.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And you hear at the beginning of that, and he's playing the Moses Fantasy, and and it's like every single note is so clear and so crisp, and he's just playing it. And then you watch and you show the picture playing, and he's looking the other way, smiling. He's not even thinking about it. He's just playing. And this is like 1981 or 82 when this was. It's like wow. I sit back and hear that, and I hear, and it's like. And then I think of what he said and how he demonstrated that, and it was just, I don't know that I could put a price tag on that, in a sense, honestly. So I think if you're going to school, way back in the day, people went to school for the education, not for the job training. I'm not saying job training has no point in there, but I think if you go to school for the education of it, and you're financially smart about it, you don't leverage yourself to the point that you can't pay it back. If you go to the place that's really the right place for you, what you're looking for is there, I don't think you're going to go wrong. I'll just put it that way.
James, thank you so much. Folks, this book is great. It's not a cheap book, but it is a wonderful book and worth the price, in my opinion. Definitely check it out if you are interested in the history of the double bass, the history of the violone, the extensive research that Alfred Planyavsky put into this. Very cool. And James, I just love that we went so deep on education. That is a subject that I am so passionate about. I'm actually not starting another podcast. That would be a bad move for the life of Jason, but I'm starting some other projects where I'm going to be focusing more on education. So I may dial down the totally education specific episodes on this podcast, but it might not too, because I don't know, this podcast is kind of about, it's not really about anything except it's things that I find interesting. And since I am a bass player and deep in the world of bass, they tend to, the Venn diagram between what we talk about here and double bass is pretty tight. So we don't if you listen to this show, we go in all kinds of different directions, though there's a lot of bass. James, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. I have 19 minutes until my next interview, so I need to get a drink of water, take care of a few things. So I'm going to close out here. If you want to get in touch with me, feedback@contrabassconversations.com. We'll put you in touch, and I love hearing from folks. If you're not on our email newsletter, go to contrabassconversations.com. You can sign up there, and you'll hear from us. We will not spam you. We will not email you to death, but it's a good way to, in my opinion, to stay connected with what's going on in the bass world. Thank you to the team that puts these episodes together: Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, Trevor Jones, and Krista Copper. Thank you for the work that you do. Mitch makes beautiful basses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Look him up on mitchmooring.com. That's his website. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again for more life on the low end of the spectrum.